So that begs the question, why is this lunar eclipse so important? Well, it's the first one in Pisces since 2016. That's almost 8 years. Welcome home, my little marine moon. But don't look at that Pisces moon. She's waxing so hard right now. She's all like, fill me up with sun juice, daddy, please. This is Saturn Girl, and it's about to be hot eclipse autumn. But I'm not ready for summer to be over. I just got my new bikini body, and it's already gonna snow next month. Anyway, we're coming up on the final round of eclipses for 2024. On September 17th, we're having a lunar eclipse in Pisces. And then October 2nd, we have a solar eclipse in Libra. And then the lunar nodes change signs in January of 2025. That's the first time they've changed signs since July of 2023. That's a big deal. And that also means that we're going to be doing your horoscopes in the second half of this video, so you better watch until the end. You must keep rewatching this video because the effects of this eclipse will persist for the next 6 months. But how about we do a little refresher on what the lunar nodes are and what they mean? The lunar nodes are where the moon's orbit intersects the Earth's. Just look at my fun little diagram over here. The place where the moon's orbit intersects the Earth's, ascending towards celestial north, is called the North Node, while the place where the moon's orbit intersects the Earth's, descending towards celestial south, is called the South Node. In ancient astrology, we often refer to the nodes as the eclipsing places. That's because they are the points where sun, moon, and earth align, which is what you need to have an eclipse. That means when we have a new moon or a full moon within 15 degrees of the lunar nodes, then we have an eclipse. It takes the lunar nodes about 18.6 years to complete a revolution around the zodiac. That means they remain in a pair of signs for about a year and a half. The lunar nodes almost always move retrograde or clockwise because of the moon's orbital axis. This process is called nodal precession, and it has a very special symbolic significance in astrology. I call this the eclipse cycle. When the nodes change signs, it represents the ending of one eclipse phase and the beginning of another. I'll explain more what this means in just a bit. But first, what do the nodes even mean in astrology? In ancient astrology, they were also referred to as the dragon's head and tail. That's because during an eclipse, it appeared to ancient people as if a dragon were devouring the sun or the moon. That's why we call a nodal month a draconic month, referring to dragons. And that's the time it takes the moon to return to the North Node. And the nodes were considered somewhat malefic in both ancient and Vedic astrology. In the context of ancient astrology, the North Node increases things, both the good and the bad, while the South Node decreases things, again, both the good and the bad. For example, I have Mars in the same sign as my North Node, and believe me, it amplifies my bitchiness. In the Vedic tradition, they are known as Rahu and Ketu. The North Node represents what we desire and what we chase, often to our own detriment. For example, my North Node is in the 5th house of sex, and, well, I'm so innocent, aren't I? On the other hand, the South Node represents release and a surrender to emptiness. It's often regarded as the spiritual path or the way of liberation for the soul. For example, mine is in the 11th house, which is often associated with groups, so it's probably no surprise that I've spent most of my life in spiritual and political organizations. In modern and evolutionary astrology, the nodes have more to do with the evolution of the soul or consciousness. You see, the North Node is sort of like the future and the direction that we're moving in, while the South Node is like the past and what we're leaving behind. When I use my eclipse cycle technique with clients, I generally approach the nodes from more of the modern or evolutionary angle. And that's because the eclipse phases to me represent the unfoldment of a person's consciousness. Eclipses then are climaxing events within this greater process, which I call self-emergence. Now, as I said earlier, eclipses are new moons or full moons within 15 degrees of the lunar nodes. A new moon near the nodes is a solar eclipse, meaning the moon passes between the Earth and the Sun, while a full moon near the nodes is a lunar eclipse, meaning that the Earth passes between the Sun and the Moon. You may know that astrologers generally consider new moons to mean new beginnings, while full moons represent culminations and endings. Therefore, solar eclipses are like supercharged new moons, meaning that you'll experience big new beginnings in the area of life indicated by the house that it's happening in for you. While lunar eclipses are like supercharged full moons and therefore represent big endings and the culmination of a period in our lives. That means rewards or consequences. We always reap what we sow, don't we? They also often bring a close to an issue that may have persisted for the previous 6 months. That's because the effects of an eclipse typically show up in the following 6 months, as I said earlier, which means that lunar eclipses close out those previous conditions. We also have a sort of 2-week liminal period between a lunar and solar eclipse. To me, this is like a period of gestation between a big ending and a big new beginning. Moreover, while the nodes are in a particular pair of signs, the eclipses will tend to bounce back and forth between those signs, but not always. In my own practice, I refer to the time the nodes spent in that pair of signs as a phase within the greater nodal cycle, which I lovingly call the eclipse cycle. In each phase, the eclipses will mostly bounce back and forth between the houses that the nodes are in for you, and each phase represents a new period in your development, which I call a conscious or self-emergence. We'll talk about that more in detail in my upcoming solar eclipse video. But suffice it to say that the famous astrologer Chris Brennan once tweeted out, "Eclipses bring the best and the worst events of our lives." Thanks for the pleasant thoughts, Chris. So that begs the question, why is this lunar eclipse so important? Well, it's the first one in Pisces since 2016. That's almost 8 years. Welcome home, my little marine moon. But don't look at that Pisces moon. She's waxing so hard right now. She's all like, "Fill me up with sun juice, daddy, please." And a lunar eclipse in Pisces is like dynamite fishing. I'm like, oh God, the horror. There were pieces of Pisces everywhere. And why y'all gotta be such drama? I mean, Pisces. More like crises, am I right? I'm so sorry to break it to you, my dear Pisces. But wherever you go, your psychology goes with you. You know, the greatest trick Pisces ever played was convincing the world that they exist. But seriously, folks, this is a big deal for several reasons. Saturn has been in Pisces since March of 2023. That means you've probably been dealing with struggles, delays, and even depression in that area of life, represented by the whole sign house that Pisces is for you. Of course, Saturn is always transiting some house in our charts, and she forces us to bring order to that house, usually because we've let that stuff get chaotic through carelessness and inattention. Think back to what's been causing you the most anxiety over the past year. It's probably related to which of your houses that Saturn is squatting in. As I said earlier, lunar eclipses are big endings and culminations. Therefore, we are reaping what Saturn has been sowing in us since last year. And you know Saturn is the reaper. Don't fear the reaper. You know, Blue Oyster Cult. Saturn entered Pisces just about a month before that first Aries solar eclipse of this phase. And on top of that, Saturn will leave Pisces for Aries in May of 2025. That's just 2 months after the final Aries solar eclipse of this entire 8 14.6-year cycle. So you see that Saturn's passage through Pisces has been intimately connected with the eclipses of this particular phase. I'm sorry, but that's pretty fucking wild to me, yo. Which of you other motherfuckers noticed that? I'll tell you. None ya. That's because I am the eclipse commander. What's even more is Saturn will be within 10 degrees of this lunar eclipse, further suggesting the significance that I've been talking about. So, to me, a seasoned astrologer with 11 herbs and spices, it's pretty clear that this lunar eclipse will bring rewards or consequences, depending on how well you've cooperated with Saturn's influences. If you've avoided taking responsibility for your situation, then it will probably hurt, and not like falling from heaven. Rather, it'll be like a painful shock that finally gets you to take charge of that area of life. On the other hand, if you've been putting in the effort, come sweat and tears, maybe a few bruises, then you'll see positive movement, and perhaps even feel a bit of relief. Saturn has also been retrograde since June, so this is a time more for reflection than direction. We revisit the corners we cut and the loose ends that we left hanging. Then Saturn stations direct in November, just a month after our Libra solar eclipse in October. So this is a telltale sign that you're entering a very active period, and you will be forced to face reality. Be careful though, because Neptune will also be conjunct this eclipse, which can bring either hope or delusion. So try your best to keep a clear and sober head. As much as you can. As if that wasn't enough, this lunar eclipse will be conjunct the North Node, which we cleverly call a North Node eclipse. This indicates that whatever happens will have a sense of stress, excitement, or even danger, as opposed to a South Node eclipse, which has more to do with acceptance, surrender to emptiness, and even powerlessness. There's a lot going on. Remember that I said this is the first lunar eclipse in Pisces that we've had in the past 8 years. So I want you to think back to the period between September 2016 and March 2017. What was going on for you then? What stood out? How did it feel? What was the outcome? Answering these questions may give you a sense of what's in store. But to get the best idea of what to expect from this eclipse, we gotta do your horoscopes for the occasion. And remember, we do these horoscopes for each rising sign because that's what determines your houses. But if you don't know it, you can watch for your sun sign. So let's start off with Aries Rising, our Aries Rising Hermes. So this means that Saturn has been transiting your 12th house of isolation and mental health. So I imagine you've been dealing with painful feelings of rejection, depression, or even facing self-destructive behavior. Do you feel abandoned? Do you feel like you've hit rock bottom? Have you been sabotaging yourself in some way? Well, now's the time to find out why. This eclipse will force you to face this question, especially if you've avoided it and just blamed other people for your circumstances. But if you've been putting in the effort to improving your situation and holding yourself accountable, you're going to see it show up as more harmonious relationships and greater self-confidence over the next 6 months. But let's move on to Taurus Rising, our Taurus Rising Hermes. This means Saturn has been transiting your 11th house of hopes, friends, and supporters. You've probably been a bit pessimistic, cynical, and perhaps even a bit of a hermit. Does it feel like you have to do everything yourself? Does it feel like you've been getting no support? Have you pushed people away in your life? Why do you think that is? If you've just rationalized this behavior to yourself, then this eclipse will likely humble you in uncomfortable ways. And perhaps you'll see that you're not an island and that you do, in fact, need other people. On the other hand, if you've noticed this tendency and put effort into reconnecting rather than pushing others away, you'll find yourself getting more support, and feeling more optimistic over the next 6 months. But let's move on to Gemini Rising, or Gemini Rising Hermes. This means Saturn has been transiting your 10th house of public life, career, and life direction. It's likely that you felt stuck, derailed, or dissatisfied with your current position or vocation. Do you feel like you haven't been recognized enough for your hard work? Do you feel like you've missed out on opportunities because people didn't notice your effort? Does it feel like you've taken chances and lost? If you've allowed yourself to be withdrawn and inactive, or if you've fallen into feeling sorry for yourself, this eclipse will probably bring a painful shock that finally shows you how intolerable your situation has become. However, if you've been putting in effort to trying to push through the glass ceiling, you're going to see that a new approach is necessary. Either way, you'll be presented with new opportunities and a new life direction. But let's move on to Cancer Rising, our Cancer Rising Hermes. This means Saturn has been transiting your 9th house of your beliefs and foreign cultures. It's likely you've noticed that your worldview doesn't serve you anymore. It's no longer representative of who you are. Have you been feeling adrift in a sea of meaninglessness? Have you fallen into a desert of spiritual aridity? Does it feel like God or the universe just hasn't been listening? Like, why hast thou forsaken me? If you've resisted and tried to hold on to beliefs that no longer align with your values, just because they're comfortable, you're going to painfully realize how those beliefs are now harmful. Otherwise, if you've been letting go and are open-minded, you'll find a new spiritual philosophy, or a new philosophical or political path. In fact, it may come from a foreign culture. But let's move on to Leo Rising, our Leo Rising Hermes. So for Leo Rising, this means Saturn has been transiting your 8th house of death, losses, and inactivity. You've likely been experiencing death, whether literal, from the loss of someone in your life, or through a material loss, especially with money. Have you racked up some debt or taxes? Have you been facing fears or painful memories? Let me tell you, grief is good. We need to process our feelings of loss. But if we've been grasping at people and things that are gone, then we're going to feel weighted down, guilty, or resentful. This lunar eclipse will then show us that letting go is freedom, and forgiveness releases us from owing or being owed. Even if you've been making progress with letting go of the past, it still means learning to take an active approach to making space for new experiences. But let's move on to Virgo, our Virgo Rising Hermes. This means that Saturn has been transiting your 7th house of partnerships, marriages, and oppositions. This can strain our relationships, make us drift apart, and we feel like we don't even know our partner anymore. It can also bring a deepening of commitment, but you may feel trapped. Have you felt like you've lost your independence? Or have you been hyper-independent and distant? Have you felt like you can't depend on other people and just thrown up a wall? If you've been hiding behind a wall, then this lunar eclipse will come at you like Berlin in 1989. Loneliness and needing help are amazing motivators. If you've been anxious about letting yourself lose your identity in a relationship, talk it out with your partner. Find time for yourself and your own interests. But let's move on to Libra Rising, our Libra Rising Hermes. This means that Saturn has been transiting your 6th house of health and obligations. It's likely that you've been experiencing a sense of subservience and powerlessness. I bet you've been having to pick up the pieces after letting things fall by the wayside, haven't you? Perhaps it's your health. Have you been taking care of everyone else but yourself? Has your health been suffering, or have chronic health issues flared up lately? The sixth house is the things that fall apart when we don't take care of them. If you haven't been listening to your body, this lunar eclipse will likely bring flare-ups that force you to. You'll be admonished to take care of yourself rather than trying to give from an empty cup. If you have been taking responsibility for your situation, then you'll be forced to pace yourself rather than burn out. But let's move on to Scorpio Rising, our Scorpio Rising Hermes. This means Saturn has been transiting your fifth house of children, sex, and pleasure. You've likely been feeling stressed out, like things are chaotic. Have you been spending all your time putting out small fires? Has it felt like you can't relax and enjoy yourself? Have you been feeling some extra strain with your children? If you've just been pushing yourself too hard this whole time, you're probably feeling burned out. And this lunar eclipse is reminding you that life isn't all tedium, and that if you can't have fun, well, you know what they say, all work and no play makes Saturn a dull girl. This is also a reminder to show love to your children, regardless of what's going on. They need to know that you're always there for them. But let's move on to Snajimattarius, our Snajimattarius Rising Hermes. This means Saturn has been transiting your fourth house of origins, the father, and your private life. You've likely felt like you've lost your privacy, been exposed, or facing uncertainty with your living situation. Have you been feeling like you've become a stranger in your own home? Have you felt like everyone else has been criticizing how you choose to live? Have you felt disconnected from your past? If so, this lunar eclipse is mostly about finding solace and a sense of home or belonging in yourself. Home is where you make it. This is about being proud of the life you've built. It's about unburdening yourself of your family legacy. You are your own person. Remember Bon Jovi? It's my life. Don't you forget. Anyway, don't let memories of mom or dad shame you. But let's move on to Capricorn Rising, our Crapricorn Rising Hermes. So this means Saturn has been transiting your third house of extended family, education, and communication. It's likely that you felt rejected by your siblings or other extended family, like aunts, uncles, cousins, whatever. It's also possible that you've experienced setbacks with school or speaking and writing projects. Do you feel like you've lost your voice? Do you feel some writer's block? Do you feel like no one is understanding what you're putting out there? This lunar eclipse is about two things for you: inspiration and connection. Rather than waiting passively for inspiration, just start doing things. Start writing. Start organizing a project. You may not be satisfied with your ideas right now, but the process opens up our minds. By connection, I do mean healing your connections with others, but I also mean reconnecting with your own creativity. But let's move on to Aqua Rising, our Aquarius Rising Hermes. This is me. And this means that Saturn has been transiting our second house of resources, finances, and material conditions. You've likely been feeling anxious about money, haven't you? I know I have. Have you felt a fear of scarcity? I know I have. Have you felt like you're bleeding money? Have you been wasteful? I know I have. Do you feel like your business is stagnant? I know I do. Anyway, if we've been reluctant to organize our finances, then we're going to get a rude awakening and painfully realize how much we've lost by avoiding responsibility. We're going to have to learn balance, that is, the law of economy. We have to balance our output with our input, our expenses with our income. Life is like a balance sheet. From the moment of conception, we are living on borrowed time. How can we best get a return on our investment? That's the question. But let's move on to Pisces Rising. Our Pisces Rising Hermes. This means Saturn has been transiting your first house of self. And by self, I mean the whole you, in body, mind, and spirit. You've likely been questioning who you are, who you've become. I bet you've also been feeling the reality of your death and your own mortality. Have you felt like you've been facing parts of yourself that you've avoided? Have you been feeling depressed or like you've been hiding yourself? This is a powerful time for you. And this lunar eclipse will force you to live a more authentic life. But unfortunately, that usually comes after saying enough is enough. You realize that life is short and you must make the most of the time you have. If you've been too afraid to be yourself, this lunar eclipse won't give you a choice. And it's never too late. Well, I hope that's been useful for you. Thank you for watching. Like this video and subscribe to my channel. And make sure to click the bell when you subscribe so that you get notified when my new videos drop. And I do the best readings. It's science. You can book through my website, saturngirl.org. And if you can't afford a reading right now, come to my live streams and get one for free. But you have to be subscribed to get notified about them. And please consider tipping me. It helps me make such wonderful content. You can give through super thanks below or become a member of my channel. And remember, I love you. You're beautiful. And have a wonderful, whatever it is you're having.